Hello everyone, it's Menenberg again on the long essay question. I know it's amazing how much we can talk about the long essay question. Understand that if it weren't for these videos, you'd probably be sitting in desks in my classroom and it would be day 3 maybe, and your eyes would be rolled all the way back in your head. At least in this sense, you're in the comfort of your home. You can watch it at your leisure. You can pause it, get a snack. You can eat. You can't eat in my classroom. You can eat while watching this. So you're welcome, I guess. This is part 5, my friends, of the long essay question. In earlier videos, we talked about breaking down prompts, how to structure an essay, how to write a thesis. In the last video, we talked about how to write contextualization. In this video, we're going to be exploring 2 other points on the LEQ rubric. So take out your rubric and follow along because we're talking about evidence. Evidence points 1 and 2. Now, the reason we're doing these together is because if you do it well, you get both at the same time. I'll show you in just a minute. Okay, so evidence point number 1. This is a direct quote from the rubric. It says, provide specific examples of evidence relevant to the topic of the prompt. This is one of the 2 points you can get without a claim, without a thesis. Contextualization was the other one, as we talked about in our last video, but remember, when it says topic of the prompt, there's no word argument, there's no word thesis, so you can rattle off a bunch of historical information. As long as it's relevant to the topic, you can get this point, okay? I'm not saying you should, but you can. All right, College Board suggests between 8 and 12 pieces of evidence to get this point. Always go with more. Remember, you've worked really hard this year. You know a lot of stuff. It's time to show it off, okay? It's time to tell us how much you know. So give us a lot of information. Because here's the thing. As we talked about in the first video, this is graded on an asset-based basis. And what I mean by that is even if you're wrong on some of that evidence, they're going to take whatever's left and grade you on that, okay? So if you give us a bunch of stuff and 1 or 2 things that are wrong, you're in a better position than putting 2 things in there and 1 of them's wrong and then you don't have enough. So give us more. 8 to 12 is where you want to aim. What is a piece of evidence? Transatlantic slave trade. Because of the influence of Enlightenment thinkers like Locke. Those are specific things. They existed at a specific time, involving specific people. We got details there. Details. On the other side, what is not a piece of evidence? Trade became popular. Women were treated as less than men. I'm not saying you don't want to ever include statements like this. I'm just saying they don't count as evidence. And the reason I use these 2 is because I've seen them so very many times. Trade became popular is my all-time favorite thing that I've seen from students. It's like trade was running for, student body president and it was a popularity contest, so trade won. No, that's not exactly what happened. Trade became widespread here versus here because of this. Like it's much more detailed and you want to talk like a historian. They don't talk about popularity with regard to trade, okay? All right, side rant. Here's an example of acceptable evidence. One innovation that encouraged economic growth during this period was the practice of merchants carrying letters of credit instead of cash. This counts because it is specific historical example and it's relevant to the prompt. I didn't give you the prompt, but you have letters of credit instead of cash. It's development. It's a specific bold word that might have appeared in your textbook. One that is not acceptable is during the period of 600 to 1450, economic growth occurred because of the expansion of trade networks and the rise of economic productive capacity. That's just rewording some prompts. Okay, there's nothing in detail there. We have a time frame, but that's a broad time frame. It's not enough to get the specific piece of evidence. Okay, evidence point 2. Now, okay. So long and short of evidence point 1, it's specific, okay, and it's related to the topic of the prompt. Evidence point 2, on the other hand, right here, is it supports your argument, your thesis, your claim. We talked all about that in the thesis video. Watch it again. In response to the prompt using specific and relevant examples of evidence. Well, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, guess what? You can get evidence point 2 by doing evidence point 1 really, really well. Okay? If your thesis addresses the prompt, then your evidence should automatically do this. Okay? It should automatically support your thesis. Again, if it supports your argument, it should naturally happen. All right, so in other words, when I'm rattling off my evidence, I'm not just giving a bunch of historical data. Okay? I'm giving data that proves my point, that proves my thesis. Otherwise, what's it in there for? You don't have a lot of time. Don't waste the time filling it with nonsense that's not immediately going to help prove your point. That's what you should be doing. That's how you get evidence point 2. So what you're doing here is answering the question, again, how does this evidence prove my thesis? I'm saying it again because that's all you need to have beaten into your brain. If you answer that question, if you're thinking about that question while you're writing that evidence, you're much more likely to tie that evidence directly to your thesis and get that evidence point 2 and evidence point 1 at the same time. You don't need to have a separate sentence for each piece of evidence tying it back to your thesis. It could be that several pieces of evidence link to your thesis in a very similar way. That's totally fine, okay? All right, let's take a look. Might include, okay, so here's another example. Innovations in navigational technology, the compass, the astrolabe, the lateen sail, the stern-post rudder, helped significantly increase the volume and extent of trade in the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. So the specific evidence, those pieces of technology, how that proves my point is they helped significantly increase the volume of trade. Okay, that's what they did. It's not that they happened or they existed. Here's what the effects of that evidence were. Okay, another one, new crops such as champa rice in China greatly boosted agricultural productivity in some regions and led to considerable economic growth. Again, evidence is champa rice in China. Okay, now that's not enough. That's evidence point 1, but by explaining what it did, it boosted agricultural productivity. That's where I get it to support my thesis. Okay, that's where I get evidence point number 2. Another one, new agricultural technologies innovations such as the 3-field system. Okay, again, specific 3-field, heavy plow, horse collar, windmills, all specific pieces of evidence. Boosted economic productivity. Again, here's what it did. Here's how it supports my thesis. That's what I'm doing with evidence point number 2. Okay, this is a little bit of a shorter video, but it should be fairly simple and straightforward. All you're doing here is you are telling us what you know and how those details prove your argument. It's not rocket science. It shouldn't feel that complicated, but a lot of students struggle with this because they don't plan ahead. This is why in that first video, I tell you to take a couple minutes when you read that LEQ rubric, the LEQ prompt, I tell you to take a couple minutes and just plan it out. Write an outline. Do that stuff, and by doing so, you're much more likely to include enough evidence to get those points on the rubric. Evidence points 1 and 2, my friends, are not too hard to get. You can get them. I believe in you. And again, remember, life's about choices, my friends. We'll see you next time when we talk about analysis and reasoning, part 1.